Hey guys, welcome back to the Joe Silverback Show and part two of Wisdom Traditions. Uh, I want to obviously distinguish between early childhood, adolescence, and moving on into young adulthood. Obviously, some of the things that I was discussing earlier were not clear in terms of age specificity. So, first 7 years, it's 100% mother father values. 7 to 11, child is opening up to a social world. 11, 11 on, but 11 to 14, 11 to 17, but 11 to 14, there is a magical moment in brain development that every parent should become aware of. For those of you who wish to allow your children to have a more metaphysical spiritual experience, I think that the psychological literatures out there and anthropological literatures out there and the brain science literatures out there that between 11 and 14, there's an incredible openness in the brain development, in neurological brain development of the child, whereby concepts of the abstract and metaphysical ideas can be absorbed into their conscious being. So I'm not going to go too deep into that right now, but I am just going to say that for those of you who do believe in allowing your children to find their own way, whether it's through the Christ consciousness, opening up to Christ consciousness within the mind-heart area of the Christian, or whether it's a Buddhist development of consciousness. Again, my show is non-denominational and open to all, and hoping all of us will learn how to relax and trust the seed of our children to follow what's in their own heart and come to their own spiritual development. Now, spiritual development is different than the values that we as parents construct for them and demand that they follow. And they are intertwined. So one of the ways in which we can be better prepared ourselves is to go into exploring other traditions, because our children are going to become exposed to them, and we need to be better able to respond to them in a healthy way. It depends on where you're growing up, but today, technology is bringing stuff from everywhere. So you could have fascism, you could have atheism, you could have nihilism, you could have nothingism, you could have radical fundamentalism. And if you don't get to a point where you trust two things: one, that your children are going to model after yourself, which means that you have to develop your own inner work, you have to develop your own center, whereby you practice what you preach and you are what you wish your children to become. So, for example, if you're talking to them all the time about being an honest human being, and you're, constantly caught in lies, then there's a conflict there. I spent a I was very fortunate in my humanities studies and my interest in religion because I spent a lot of time from 11 to 25 studying religion and experimenting with different spiritual practices. And one of the things that I found as I started to have family of my own, and as I remained open to wisdom coming from any source of wisdom tradition, and as a student of literature, and as a writer, and as a student of ideas, no matter whether or not I was talking with my Christian colleagues or my Jewish colleagues or my Buddhist friends or my Hindi people from yoga class, I was interested to know more about their own experiences, and I was interested in, and I've always been interested in, the overlap of human beings where we all come together as one. And I found that besides the specificity of the rules and regulations around that have crystallized around different religions, that at the core there were some very fundamental similarities. And obviously the similarities, one of the primary similarities, is all about being a good human being. Thus, coming back to my mother, in all of her wisdom, who never preached to anybody about religion and never preached to anybody about any of her own beliefs, but said to me when I asked her why she didn't go to church and asked her about her family, and she told me this with a tear forming in her eyes, thinking about her parents who had deceased at the time. My parents were just good people. And what my mother was telling me is that being a good person was a challenging enough task for one lifetime in a human being, that she didn't need to spend the rest of her life studying religion or preaching to anybody about anything of her own belief system. What she needed to do was learn or demonstrate what being a good role model is and was and will always be. And my mother's integrity around being a good person is the role model that I have the rest of my life to reflect on, meditate on, and hopefully come to bring more and more into my own life. Now, another thing that happened to me, in my young adulthood, with my children, with home education, with bringing books and literature to my children, was that as they got older, I wanted them to develop a wide range of understanding of the world, and I was fascinated with one of my sons coming home to me one day and telling me that there was no God. And I was fascinated. Okay, that's an interesting topic of conversation. What exactly do you mean by that? And he explained exactly what he meant by that. And it dawned on me at that time that upon conversation with him, he, like most of us who has not gone too deep into his thought processes, didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, and it wasn't my job to impose something upon him, but it was my job to get him to at least be clear on where his ideas were coming from, why he was choosing those ideas. So he also came home to me talking to me about the Bible, because he saw me reading the Bible at the beach all the time. And I never really talk to too many people unless they came up to me and asked me about that. And I didn't read, and I don't read the Bible as a practicing Christian because I have some fundamental differences in what I believe a true Christian practices that's different from me, and therefore I don't want to lie to myself or misrepresent anything. But there is deep wisdom in the Bible for anybody who wants to find it. And one of the things that I was noticing that as I was going through my metamorphosis, in one of my metamorphoses was this reaction against Christianity in the Western culture, that my generation was the flowers of their, maybe it started with my father's generation, and we were, but we were inundated with that with kids. So in a California or a United States cultural tradition where I was growing up, especially without a father in the home and without connections to my roots were on the East Coast that I never really grew up with, was this free-for-all, this swimming in a sea of freedom to select and choose. And part of that free-for-all was this annihilation of Christianity and anything that had to do with, quote, the authoritarian church. And that's a long discussion I'm going to be having. By the way, for any of you interested, one of my closest and dearest friends, an Italian Roman Catholic, Tom Ventimiglia, who is also a in-depth thinker and psychologist. We're gonna have a conversation about religion in versus spiritual practice or metaphysical practice or meditation practice or contemplation practices. But anyway, one of the things that I came to understand as a maturing young family man and thinker and writer was this: that so many of the friends and colleagues I was running into who had grown up with similar backgrounds had this resistance to Christianity, and it's brainwashed and pumped in to our young men and women's, boys and girls, adolescent, developing brains, that everything bad in the world is a result of Christianity in the West. So let's take the politics aside, let's take religion aside, and let's just look at wisdom traditions. So the book of Psalms has some of the most beautiful spiritual truth in it that I have ever found. The story of Job is all about suffering and the human being's aloneness in the world, and what is he going to do about this suffering and this position of being alone in the world. And it's all about his spiritual development and his faith. I don't care whether it's Islamic faith, Judeo-Christian faith, Hindi faith, Buddhist faith, atheistic faith, secularist faith. What I care about is that each one of us come to meditate and reflect upon who we are, what we want, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and how does our faith, our belief, our religious viewpoint, how do we meditate on what it means to be a good human being, and let being a good human being just relax as we explore wisdom traditions, including Christianity, for all of you who have tried to run away from it and annihilate it, get away from your parents, come full circle back to it and start with the book of Genesis. There was darkness upon the face of the earth. The earth was a void, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and it was good. And it was the beginning of the first day. I don't have to be a practicing Catholic, a practicing Christian, a practicing anything to be moved by the power and the force of a vision of being out in the darkness, alone in the wilderness, with no electricity, pre-civilization, and understand that I'm looking up into a galaxy of stars and comets shooting across the sky and planets, and it's dark. And it's dark. And the sun comes up in the morning and it's light, and there's day. I can just meditate on the concept of light coming in from darkness, and that's powerful. And that's behind every monotheistic religion, and that's behind every world religion, and that's at the heart and the seat of all spirituality, and that's at the heart and the seat of nature. Because without light, without the sun, we do not exist. Namaste. That's the second part of the wisdom traditions. I'm getting a lot of great questions and stories on this, and we're going to have, like I said, some longer interview sessions with some guest speakers. Checking out.